Hasham tweeted this photo of an elderly voter saying, voting even when he's 90 years old, hashtag Iran elections 2016. Well, now moving on to discuss all this is my guest Yasmin Maffa, who's chair of the Hands of the People of Iran. Yasmin, welcome to the programme. First of all, let's just get the kind of framework right here. I mean, it'll be a surprise to some people who listen to the Western media that Iran even has elections. So, on the other hand, there's a large number of candidates excluded from them. So where does the balance lie between authoritarianism and democracy in the Iranian political system?
It's a very complicated situation. So these elections are elections, be it with limited numbers of candidates. Candidates have to be part of the two factions of the many factions of the regime. So there can be reformists, soft reformists, hardliners, ultra-conservatives. But within the framework of what one could call the Islamic government, different people with different agendas, both in terms of internal politics, economics, and international politics, present themselves. There is a council that looks at the various candidates, and thousands were eliminated from being elected or being candidates.
Who gets eliminated?
Well, for example, for the Council of Guardians that will elect the next supreme leader, women were eliminated in general. If you are a leftist or a known secular opponent of the Islamic regime, you will get eliminated. In this particular round, there have been some reformists, maybe more hardline in terms of their reformism than Rouhani, who have been eliminated. Ayatollah Khomeini's grandson, who is known to be a supporter of the reform movement, was not allowed to stand as a candidate for the Council of Experts. So quite a lot of people do get eliminated from standing. They can appeal. Within the appeals, some people have managed to get back, but still, the list of people who were not allowed to stand is above 1,000, I think. The two sides, or if you like, if you divide the two main factions, have been doing a lot of publicity over the last months. I hear today that Mousavi and his wife, who are under house arrest, were asking for a moving ballot box to be sent to their address, because they do have what they call mobile ballot boxes. Karoubi has done the same. So for the reformist faction, this is a battle to win on the basis of the deals they've done. They are promising economic prosperity. Whether that's possible in the current economic climate or not is a different matter, but that's what they are promising. The more conservative faction is saying we should return to an economy of resistance, to sanctions weren't necessarily bad for us. So there are very clear divisions between the two sides on some issues.
Let me come back to exactly what those divisions are. Just one last question about the sort of nature of the system then. I mean, lots of sort of parliamentary democracies, you could say, restrict the choices to ones that are acceptable to the elite. I mean, famously, Noam Chomsky described American democracy as a totalitarian system with two different factions. So is the Iranian system more restrictive than that kind of setup that we might see in other parliamentary democracies?
I would say so, because you really can't be participating as a candidate unless you are within the framework of what I would call the Islamic Republic government. Having said that, I would have my own criticisms of other elections in terms of the kind of finances that backs various elections. And of course, finance has played a role in the Iranian election as well, but not to the extent that, for example, it's playing in the current US elections.
Yes, well, it'll be hard to match that. So, in terms of the turnout then, which looks as if it's big, How does that fit with this? Because usually what happens when there's a kind of restricted choice in electoral systems, it usually tends to depress the turnout. And it's often when we see post-apartheid elections or something where people are experiencing elections for the first time, that we see a very high turnout. So what's the turnout tell us about the system?
I think the turnout tell us that people within the limitations of the current system do see the differences, and within those differences they want to make decisions that affect their lives. In the case of the next Supreme Leader, the Council of Experts will make a difference. Is he going to be a more liberal Supreme Leader? What is, if you like, difficult to understand is enthusiasm to elect people who will nominate a dictator. So, given that contradiction, I think people still want to see a more moderate person as the Supreme Leader. In terms of the Islamic Parliament, it has become a bit of a conflict between a government that is more reformist and a parliament that is mainly dominated by hardliners. So Rouhani and his government are at the cusp of a victory after the Iran deal, or at least what is seen as a victory internally, and they hope to maximize their gains from that situation. So it's inevitable that there is a lot of enthusiasm for this election, despite its limitations.
So just unpack the labels for us a little bit. Okay, so the reformists have got a boost out of the nuclear deal, but what does that, obviously reformist sounds good, hardliners sound bad. What's the sort of substantive behind the labels?
Okay, I think that with the reformists you have to say that they are, let me first say that both sides are not against capitalism. I think we have to be very clear about that. The reformists are saying that the future of Iran is in a global capital, and the more deals we do, the better for the economy of the country. The Rouhani and his foreign minister have been going around to a lot of European cities asking for investment in Iran. And the way they sell it is that we have a cheap labour that is skilled labour, speaks English, and this is a good place for you to invest. The hardliners are in a different type of economy, so they are saying some of the slogans of 1979. They are against arrogance of the United States, but on the other hand, throughout the sanction period, we did see them dealing with the great Satan, the United States, via various companies in the Arab countries or sanction busting activities. So also their pretense is a return to a third world independent economy. So they are very realistic that such a thing is not possible. It is because their slogans are directed towards that kind of economies that they are hoping to maintain an older generation, a generation that is still loyal to the Supreme Leader, and maintains this illusion of independence.
So, given that, broadly from what you've said, the reformists have got a kind of neoliberal, globalised economic perspective. The hardliners, even though the reality might be different, have certainly got a more kind of autarkic view of what the economy might be like. What's the difference for ordinary Iranians, or is there any?
Well,
and which ordinary Iranians, I guess, is the...
Yes, yeah. Well, I think the overwhelming majority of the Iranian people could be counted amongst people who sell their labour one way or another, and most of them would be classified as working, be it many of them white-collar workers. I would say that both sides are into exploiting this workforce. The question is that as far as the conservative faction is concerned, it's more a capital that is hidden, that you don't see, because it's the Revolutionary Guards, the various industries they own, the banks they own, and so there could be this pretense that it's for the state. On the other hand, the so-called reformists are more in favour of private capital, if you like, neoliberal capital, but they're also, some of them are also for further nationalisation. So in terms of who is more a free market economist, who is more a statist economist, I would say both factions contain elements of both sides. To a certain extent, the reformists are less free marketeers than parts of the very conservative Islamic groups.
Okay, and so we're just coming to the end of our time. Briefly, we won't hold you to this, but who do you expect to win and what do you expect will happen?
Well, very difficult to say. There are rumours that they've been busing people to Tehran to vote for the Conservatives from the rural areas. I would put a guess, and I don't want to be held on it. I would say Tehran, which is important, will be won by the reformists. And major cities will be won by reformists, while the Conservatives will make gains in rural and provincial towns.
Okay, Yasmin Mallah, thanks very much for joining us for that discussion. And that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's show, and thank you for taking the time to watch. Now, do remember, you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannel